Welcome, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. As we get started, please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. As you can see, we have a slide up here that we're encouraging you to share your name, what state or where you're from, and what's an essential protest safety item you always bring to actions. Feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat as we get started. And we're just going to wait for everyone to connect. Folks are still joining. And we'll get started in just a few minutes. Awesome. I see some of my Georgia neighbors in the house. Welcome, welcome. We got Maryland, we got Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. Always bring a charged phone. Yes. Okay, Sherry from Alamogordo. Yes, with the demonstration scheduled. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to give it just a minute or two more as folks are still getting connected, but please keep introducing yourselves in the chat. And we're asking folks if you could share your name, state, or city and state if you want to. And what is an essential protest safety item you always bring to actions? And so far, I've seen a map. We've seen a charged phone. What are the other essential safety items that you normally bring to a protest? Okay, Illinois, Sacramento, Wisconsin, Brooklyn in the house, Southern California, Colorado. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. First aid supplies, yes. Always good to have some first aid supplies. Many friends. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think a few more folks might be getting connected, but let's go ahead and get started for now. My name is Amanda Chavez Barnes. I'm Senior Director of Programs at Women's March, and we are so delighted to welcome you to part 2 of the mass training for women's protection teams. We're really grateful to be joined by our colleagues at Nonviolent Peace Force this evening to walk you through how to form women's protection teams and what are the different skills, techniques, and methods and modalities that we can learn together in order to work together to keep each other safe in our communities. Because we know that regardless of the escalating political violence that we are seeing, the harassment, threats, and intimidation, our communities are depending on us through fear, through pain, through loss, to continue going and continue moving forward so that we can make sure that we are not giving up on the fight for our families, for our freedoms and our futures. And the only way that we can do that is in relationship and community with each other. And an incredible resource for doing this work together in community is the Women's Protection Team formation. So before we get started and I hand it over to our colleagues at Nonviolent Peace Force, I want to do a quick tech check. This is a webinar, so that means that you will automatically be muted and your camera is off. So don't worry about us being able to see you or hear you. We cannot see or hear you in a webinar. However, we would love for you to engage with us in the chat, which is where we'll be dropping some links for y'all to check out on different subjects. I'm going to drop a link here in just a bit for you to join a community after this. And you can drop your reactions, comments, and connect with other people in the chat as well. Underneath the video here, you'll also see with the question mark, the Q&A. And that means that you can go ahead and put your questions in there. We prefer for you to put your questions in the Q&A because they can really easily get lost in the chat. So if you have a question that you'd really like to be answered by Nonviolent Peace Force folks or Women's March folks, please put that in the Q&A. And then we, of course, have the different reactions, emojis, where, you can send some hearts, and it'll float up on the screen, or some applause or whatever if you're feeling, just to engage and let our folks know how you're responding, how you're engaging with the material, right? And then I also wanted to point out that if you need captions, you can look at the button that has the CC for closed captioning. We do have live captions enabled. So just click that button and you should see a little square appear on your screen that has live captioning. Okay, so I think that is it for the tech check. I wanted to give a plug before we get started to join the Women to Women organizing space so that you can be connected and stay in community with other folks who've done this training and are interested in creating women's protection teams. So I just dropped the link in the chat. Everyone, I encourage you to go ahead and click on that link and get signed up for the Slack. This is where you'll be able to, join, introduce yourselves. It's kind of like a continuation of this chat space, right? That also will include myself and other Women's March staff and volunteers to help connect y'all to each other and answer any questions that may come up and continue engaging with you as we work to build out women's protection teams across the US. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to our colleagues at Nonviolent Peace Force to get the training started. And once again, thank you so much to Nonviolent Peace Force for being here with us and leading this really critical training at this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you, Women's March, and thank you everyone for spending the next hour with us to be able to learn how to build women's safety or women's protection teams. This is really built off of the work that NP has done in our other country programs. In South Sudan, we have women's protection teams protecting women in the internally displaced people's camps to be able to get fresh sources of water. And here in the United States, we've been working with communities to be able to build out protection teams and safety teams to keep themselves and each other safe, whether it's at protest or just in the community. Nonviolent Peace Force is an international humanitarian protection organization that works to build peace side by side with communities around the world and uses unarmed civilian protection to keep communities and vulnerable people safe. So diving right in, building a safety team has a number of different elements. So we'll start with the foundational elements, and then we'll talk about the before, during, and after. So a big part of creating a safety team is coming up with guiding principles. Please feel free to use what's useful and leave what's not. But I'll share what the principles that we use for many of our safety teams. The first one is do no harm and nonviolence. What this means is that you are not creating more harm for another person, whether it's physical or psychosocial. When you're in a safety team mode, you are practicing active nonviolence. So that is really, nonviolence is a very individual, but also a collective framework, and it's important for you to discuss what that looks like with yourself and your safety team. The next is to spread calm and good vibes. When you're on the ground, the last thing that you want to do is to heighten what may be an already tense space. So what that looks like is just smizing at folks if you're wearing a mask, which everyone should be, for many reasons. But it also means just like welcoming folks into the space. Part of what this does is it gives you and your safety team a means of connecting with the community, but also taking stock of who's there. There may potentially be agitators, there may be people that are bad faith actors. It's important to never come in from a very aggressive with aggressive energy, but rather one that's more invitational. So that way it helps you to identify what the baseline is for that specific action and to help you identify any anomalies that might come up. Next is invitation and consent. These are two very important things. We only operate as a safety team at the invitation of organizers or the community. And consent is an ongoing process for us to be able to do our work. That means having open lines of communication with the organizers, or even when we're supporting folks, like in the image you see here, I was supporting two people that had been shot with pepper balls and rubber bullets, innocuously named rubber bullets or baton rounds. And I, of course, asked them, did you need support? You never want to make an assumption, and you always want to be able to communicate what your support looks like to the other person. We protect everyone on safety teams, and it's important for us to be able to operate from a place of nonpartisanship. We are, as a safety team, you're working as a third party within an action. You're not the protesters and you're not the state. Examples of third parties are the National Lawyers Guild or the ACLU's protest monitors. As a safety team, you would be considered a third party in an action. So it's important that you maintain nonpartisanship and that you're able to support anyone that might ask you for help. Next is we're the first to arrive and the last to leave. Pretty simple. We don't, we're not fair weather friends. We're usually there before the organizers are there scouting out, and we're the last ones to leave, meaning that sometimes we'll be accompanying folks to their cars, to their subway stops, or even back to their homes if people request it. We radically center those most directly affected by violence. What that looks like is when there is an action being organized by Black trans organizers, that we listen to what their call for action is. We have that, if we've been invited by them and if we have an open line of communication, we radically center what their needs are in that moment. So think of ourselves as a support mechanism for them. We practice agility, which is really like yes and. If anything happens, like if someone, oh, I forgot my phone, how are you gonna be agile in that moment? Or if someone says, oh, I don't have my inhaler with me, what can you do to be able to get them an inhaler or support them to get their inhaler? Practicing agility means understanding that every situation may have a direct solution that you can provide, or you can help them come up with a solution. And lastly, solidarity, not saviorship. We're not here to save anyone. We're not here to extol a patriarchal framework of safety and protection. We're here to build safety alongside one another. When we say we keep us safe, it means when I'm here to support you, then you're here to support me. So there's a shared understanding of how we show up for one another. So along with the principles, there are safety team agreements. And these are three very simple agreements: consent, communication, and care. Consent means we are there at the invitation of the organizers and the community. As I mentioned earlier, consent also means informing people that you may be supporting exactly what you're going to be doing. If someone gets hit by tear gas or pepper spray, you don't swoop in and bring them to the other side of the action. You ask, do you need support? Usually they'll say yes. Then you narrate exactly what you're going to do. I'm going to put my hands on your shoulder. I'm going to move you 10 feet to the left. I'm going to have you sit down. I'm now going to put water in your eye. It's just water. It's going to sting for a second. Now let me lift you up. We're going to move further out where there's no other people. Please let me know if this is okay. Like, you want to make sure that you're checking in throughout. So the consent figures into communication. That's communication with the community or those that you're supporting, and also communication within the team. You never want to go radio silent when you're at an action. That means, like, if you set up a signal chat where everyone on the safety team is on, if someone, you want to have someone monitoring that. And usually when we're on safety teams, we have buddies. So one person will be keeping their eyes and ear out for anything that might happen. And the other person will usually say, I'm looking down at the signal chat. Lastly is care. As we're caring for communities, we want to be able to practice radical care for ourselves. That means understanding what our thresholds are, what our boundaries are, and what do we need for support. So I want to take just a moment to ask folks to drop in the chat. What are some agreements you and your pod, group, or squad use when you're on the ground at actions? Once again, what are some agreements you and your pod, group, or squad use when you're on the ground at actions? Agreements can be everything from call me when you get home safe, or if something pops off, we got to leave. We'll give that just a little bit longer. So we talked about some of the foundational aspects of building a safety team. Now we're going to be going into the before, during, and after. So even before you put together a safety team or even like a safety pair, you want to conduct a threat assessment and capacity map. And this is something that we did together in the previous training. And there's a link to that training along with resources to come up with your own threat assessment and capacity map. One of the capacities that we had identified was having a safety team, which is exactly why we're having this training today. Next is you want to identify the scope, roles, and the process, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Following that is setting boundaries, knowing when you stay or when you go and sharing that with everyone. Each person is going to have a different risk calculus, and each person is going to have a very different threshold. Part of the 3 C's is that communication and communicating with our team or our partner when we need to leave. For some folks that have experienced police violence or other folks that have PTSD from previous actions, it's really important to be able to share that in order for folks to be able to support you. And those instances are what we call activation points. Not necessarily, we don't, some folks might call them triggers, but we call them activation points. This is when your body goes into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And then lastly is anchor points, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Following that is establishing protocols. These are the standard operating procedures that you and your team will utilize on the ground, whether it's protocols around formation, comms, where you're going to rendezvous, or the actions you're going to take. And then lastly is gear up. You want to use your threat assessment to help inform what kind of gear you're going to bring based on the threat and the risks that you're going to be facing. So we talked about roles, and I just want to say that this is in a perfect world. Each safety team would have all of these roles. What I do want to say is every safety team or anytime you're practicing safety within a protest safety space, you want to be with at least one other person. Always go with a buddy, never go alone. So in a not perfect world, but in a optimal situation, these are the roles that you would have at a large scale action for your safety team. Firstly, you would have the decision makers, which is usually the organizer and a safety team lead, or a person that has taken on the role of coordinating all of the different leads and safety team members, and also communicating what the wishes of the organizer or community is. Next is you want to have a physical safety lead. This is a person that could be on a bike or running around. This person would be working with marshals and medics, basically coordinating their formations and also what they're going to be covering. Next is a psychosocial safety lead. This is someone that has experience in de-escalation and supporting folks from a holistic safety and security lens. What this can be is if there is someone on your squad that is a therapist or a mental health professional, there's a ton of resources on how to build that lead capacity, but in essence, their role is a protection of the psychosocial safety of everyone at the action. That means that they'll most likely be coordinating the de-escalation team. And when we talk about de-escalation, we talk about de-escalation in that you can only de-escalate yourself and those you have a right relationship with. You will never be able to de-escalate state security or angry white supremacists. But what you can do is to de-escalate yourself and those you have a right relationship with in order to come up with a clear mind to figure out what steps you need to take to either intervene or to get out of a situation. Next is the care team. These are folks that are passing out water, menstrual supplies, snacks, and just like checking in on folks throughout. Sometimes the care team might be holding space for folks, and other times the care team will just be making sure that marshals, medics, and the organizers are cared for. And then lastly, which I think is a really important role that I hope we're able to develop more. And this is something based on the work of Mia Mingus, Alice Wong, Stacey Milburn Park, and other disabled women of color that have created an entire framework around how folks who may not be able to, quote unquote, be on the ground can support. A remote support lead is, in essence, is, if you remember the Matrix operator. This person is monitoring police channels. They're watching live streams as they're happening, and they also are the voice that's in the ear of the on-the-ground comms person. They're telling them, "Hey, the police are coming in with paddy wagons," or "Hey, I'm seeing that there are white supremacists coming in with weapons. Here's your exit points." So they're basically your eye in the sky that is making sure that you and your team have the information that they need, that they can't identify in that moment. So we talked about the risk grid yesterday, and I wanted to just offer this framework for folks. This is basically using the same format. You have state action, leave action, high risk, low risk. The way that you use this is step one, you brainstorm all likely risks. If you've created a threat assessment, you more than likely have a ton of risks under your specific threat. Once you do that, you want to place each risk in the grid based on your personal risk calculus. Like I said earlier, each person is going to have a different risk calculus based on their identity, based on their lived experience, based on their activation points. So it's important to find where on the grid your risks lie. And then lastly, you want to share your results with your team to build up an adjoining protocol. So what does this look like? So for myself, some risks that I've identified is if there's an increase in police presence, I'd most likely stay at the action, but it's pretty high risk. If there's a use of tear gas, pepper spray being used against protesters and third parties, at that point, it's high risk and I need to leave the action. So this helps to provide informed consent throughout with you and your team. Some folks may be able to stay longer. Other folks are like, at this point, if this happens, I need to head out. So I mentioned protocols a little bit earlier. So when you're creating protocols, it's once again some basic standard operating procedures. So protocols are procedures and guidelines that you and your team must agree to before an action. The way you create a protocol is by identifying the situation plus action plus an objective, and that equals a protocol. The situation is a likely situation that might arise at the action. The action, or sorry, might arise at a protest. The action is what would you do if that situation arises? The objective is the why when you're taking action, and the protocol is a summary of above. The way you can articulate this is if X happens, then we will do Y in order to do Z. Once again, if X happens, we will do Y in order to do Z. So I'd like us to do this activity together if possible. For those of you that have already built out your threat assessment, and maybe some folks already have some risks in mind, let's build a protocol together. So if X happens, then we do Y in order to Z. So my example would be if state or non-state actors use tear gas or pepper spray, then everyone on the safety team will put on their P100 full face masks and respirators and assist protesters to safely vacate the area. So let's take a moment. You don't have to share this in the chat, but I'd like to invite you to either jot it down or put it in your notes app. If X happens, then we do Y in order to do Z. So the X is once again a situation that might arise. The action is a thing that you're going to be doing, and the objective is in order to. Um, so let's just take a few moments for folks to build out a protocol based on risks you may have identified in the previous training. And just an invitation, if anyone wants to drop it in the chat, please feel free to do so. So we talked a lot about procedures and a lot of the external parts of building a safety team. One of the most important things, along with the foundational and just like the operational side, is understanding yourself. As you're now part of a collective, you're now part of a team. It's important for you to understand what your survival responses are in likely situations that might arise. So survival responses are sometimes called trauma responses. We like to call them survival responses because we see them as ancestral technologies that you quite literally carry in your body that your ancestors have passed down to you. This is a way for us to be able to keep ourselves and one another safe. The well-known survival responses are fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Once again, that's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn, in essence, means basically being overly polite or being a people pleaser in order to keep yourself and others safe. I know for myself, my survival response when aggression happens to me is to go into a fawn state. That's something that I've learned as a queer person of color in this country that has kept me alive and safe. There is no right or wrong survival response. Whichever one has kept you safe is your survival response. So I'd like to invite folks, we'll spend a couple moments to write down. You don't have to, please feel free not to put this in the chat. Once again, do not put this in the chat. Write down your survival response when aggression happens to you, and then write down your survival response when you witness aggression happening to others, and notice if there's a difference. As I was mentioning earlier, my survival response when aggression happens to me is to go into fawn mode. But when I see aggression happening to others, that's when my fight mode kicks in. And we're able to use these different energies to be able to inform what our plan is in the moment. So the reason that we think about our survival responses is then helps to inform when we know we're within our window of tolerance. This is when we are cool, calm, collected, and connected. And when you have identified, here are the things that might activate me, it helps to let us know when we're being pushed outside of our window of tolerance. There are two primary responses. There is hyperarousal or speeding up. This is a fight and flight response. And then there's hypoarousal or slowing down. This is the freeze or fawn response. When you are cool, calm, collected, and connected, you're in a state of regulation. You're better able to think. You're thinking clearly. Your heart rate is at baseline. It's important for us to be able to get back into our window of tolerance when we're in a situation where chaos is happening all around us. So how do we do that? So by understanding our survival responses, it then informs our survival tools. There are two survival tools. One is your activation point. What could activate you at an action? What are your triggers at an action? Is, if you see the state security bring out a long-range acoustic device, that might be an activation point. If you see someone that is yelling at another person, that might be an activation point. You want to connect your activation points to an anchor point. When you are activated, what can your team or buddy do to anchor you? So when I'm on safety teams, I tell my team to, one of my anchor points is I will take a break and step away if I need to get back into my window of tolerance, Or when things are really escalated and that's near impossible, I've given my team consent to put their hand on my shoulder, or if they're not there, at least we're going to be within line of sight to be able to make direct eye contact with me and hold it for 3 seconds. So I invite for folks to think about your activation points and also what are the anchor points attached to that. And the reason that we bring these up is we share these with our team. If they best know how to support us, then we're able to support others. So that was a lot of information very quickly. And for folks that were on the training last time, you might uh, recognize this. The Holistic Check-in is a tool that we developed back in 2014 during the Ferguson Uprising following the murder of Michael Brown by Darren Wilson. In essence, a holistic check-in is a tool that we use with folks that are pushed out of their window of tolerance or are in a freeze state and need a moment, someone to hold space for them. The 4 questions are, what are you feeling physically right now? What are you feeling emotionally right now? What are you feeling energetically right now? And what does support look like for you right now? So I want to spend half a moment for folks to feel free to jot down what are you feeling physically, emotionally, energetically, and take a moment to jot down what support looks like for you. This tool, in essence, helps to reinforce and support someone, ourselves or other people's agency and autonomy when violence has momentarily taken it away from us. So by identifying what's happening with our bodies and naming what our support needs are, we reclaim our agency and autonomy. So with that, I'd like us to take a moment to care for ourselves in the ways that we need. For folks that have written down their support needs, some people might be like, I need to step out for a moment. I might need to get water. I might need to buy a break. We'll do a 2-minute break for you to be able to take care of yourself in the ways that you need. And once again, for folks on the chat, if you have questions, please drop them in the question area. Our team will either respond to the questions or will collect questions that we're not able to get to, and we'll send it out after this training, along with the accompanying training deck and accompanying resources. So please feel free to take another minute to either stretch. You might want to notice your breathing, your breath rate, your heart rate. Is it elevated? Is it at baseline? Is there tension in your body? Are you relaxed? Great. Well, I hope folks are able to come back into the space. So we talked about the before, and now I'd like to talk about the during. So doing an on-site briefing, identifying formations, talking about the layout of the action, the decision tree. You assign formations and positions. You practice situational awareness at all times. You communicate, communicate, communicate. And lastly, you take action and do no harm. So what is an on-site briefing? In essence, you want to share the who, what, where, when, why, and how with the safety team. On-site briefings usually happen at least an hour beforehand for you to be able to give your safety team the assignments that they need along with their roles. So the questions that you want to ask yourself beforehand and to share with the safety team is, who is on the safety team? What are their roles? What are folks going to be doing specifically on the safety team? Who are the decision makers? So if something goes down, this is who we go to. What are our objectives? What are we trying to accomplish? Is it to keep people safe from potential state violence? Is it to keep people safe from violence in general? Is it to support folks that may be getting activated that need someone to hold space for them? So you want to come up with your objectives based on what the specific need is for that action. Next is understanding your roles, and we'll talk about that I mean, really, your roles are, as we shared earlier, it's what you're tasked with. And roles can be with a multi-person safety team, or it can just be two people. One person with their situational awareness on, the other person is monitoring the signal chat or seeing what's happening around you. Next is where will the action be or go? Following that is when does a protective action start and end? And it's important to share this with folks so people can make a decision. And that way, folks who might need to leave early, you don't have to like track them down to make sure they got home safe. Why? Why are we here? What is the objective? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do in this space? And then lastly, how will we be keeping people safe? And that really depends on each safety team and on each situation. Very quickly, formations and positions are two things to keep in mind. Formations are, you never want to be solo. Two is good, three is better. You want to build trust across a team, making sure people know names, pronouns, why they're here, just like building that trust in real time. And you want to share your activation and anchor points with your team or your buddy. Next is position. So when we have stationary safety teams, we'll use a clock formation for that. Um, and these positions are really dependent on the context, location, and objective of your action. And it'll be different if it's a march versus a stationary rally. So as you can see here, we overlaid a clock, and we had people stationed at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock. 4 o'clock was a cooling station that we had identified since this was like in the middle of summer. We had folks at 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And every 15 minutes, each team would replace another team and change up in the clock formation. This ensured that no one got overly fatigued, but also kept people fresh and also gave people enough time to be able to rest in the cooling station as they needed. Next is you want to make sure that folks are in positions where they're in line of sight, meaning you can see the safety teams to your right and to your left. Also, if possible, to be able to see who the safety team lead is in case there is a nonverbal signal that's going to be used for a particular action. Next is communicate, communicate, communicate. This means to let folks know I'm going to go on a break real quick, or hey, I'm feeling really lightheaded. I might need to go sit down. Communication within the teams also means caring for ourselves as we're communicating about any potential dangers or anomalies that we might see. Next is no one gets left behind. So if we're in a march formation, we want to make sure that we have enough people at the back to ensure that no one is left behind. I've been part of way too many marches where our disabled relatives were left, quite literally left behind. So the role of the safety team is to make sure that everyone is part of the action and safe. Lastly is you want to establish exit points and a meetup location. Exit points are like, how do you get out in case something happens? Where's your primary and secondary? And a meetup location is basically a rendezvous point that you can have that's close by the action, but far enough to where you won't get kettled in or trapped in the area. Practicing situational awareness at all times means turning it on and then turning it off. The reason we turn it on and off is because if you don't turn it off, then you can be put in a state of hypervigilance where you're constantly looking for threats when there are no threats. You want to check in with yourself and your buddy and team throughout. That means, hey, I noticed this. Hey, I'm feeling sketch. There's a sketch energy. That's your body telling you there's something off. So always communicate and check in with yourself and your buddy. Next is to practice a lifeguard scan. In essence, very quickly, this is 3 parts. You're looking across, you're looking close to far, and then lastly, you're looking from the feet to the top of the head, from the feet to the top of the head. And the reason that we practice a lifeguard scan is it helps us identify anomalies. If someone is carrying a weapon or something else that might put people in danger. Practicing lifeguard scan also ensures that you don't get fatigued with observation fatigue. Next, communicate. I talk about this a lot. If you see something, make sure that your other team members are informed, whether that is a change in police formation, whether that is a agitator that is coming for someone. Your communicating with your team helps to come up with a collective action if a situation arises. And lastly, practice the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, and act. We'll include more information about the OODA loop after this. It's an entire training on all into itself, but we'll make sure that folks have a primer on the OODA loop. So after an action, once everything has shut down, folks have gotten home safe, or the organizers have dispersed everyone and called for an official disbursement, usually we'll have an offsite debrief. That means what are the things that went well, what are the things that need to change, or what are some deltas for the next time there's an action. And also it's important to collect any incidents for incident reporting. We'll include information on how to create an incident report if you are collecting that kind of information. Lastly, each person goes through a holistic check-in with their buddy or their team. And you are as candid as possible. Ian Ferguson, one of our team members, one of the senior team members, I did a holistic check-in with her, and she said, physically, I'm feeling very dehydrated. I haven't menstruated, and I'm supposed to. This happens when I'm very stressed out. Psychosocially, I am very stressed out. So just like listed down where she was currently at. And her support need was if I notice her not drinking water, to remind her to drink water. So lastly is a home safe protocol. This is something that we ask everyone to do after each action. This means on the Signal chat or whatever method that you use to communicate with the entire safety team is to let people know you're home safe. And then you turn off your situational awareness by practicing 5 beautiful things. This means utilizing your entire observational framework that you were just using to identify threats to then find 5 beautiful things in your home or where you're safe. This can be noticing the way that the light is streaming through the window for the first time, or that there's a letter you have from a friend, or you walk by a mirror and you're like, damn, I look good today. The 5 beautiful thing exercise helps us to turn off our situational awareness so that we don't go into a state of hypervigilance. We use our tools to keep us safe, psychosocially, physically, before, during, and after an action. So we really quickly went over agreements and guiding principles, what to do before, during, and after an action, the protocols or standard operating procedures that you can build with your team, and identifying your survival responses and tools. This training is usually a 2 to 3 day training. These are guidelines, and these are good practices. Not everything here will be applicable in every situation, but we just wanted to give folks some guidelines and good practices that we've built and created and practiced over the last 30 years. So we wanted to make sure that we had some time to answer some questions. Thank you everyone for being present. Once again, you will get a copy of this training, a clip of it, sorry, not a clip, but a video of it, along with the training deck itself and accompanying resources. My name is Kalian Mendoza. I'm the Director of Mutual Protection for Nonviolent Peace Force. My pronouns are he or they, them. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. And I'll hand it back to Amanda, and we'll answer some questions from the crowd.
Thank you so much, Kalayan. And thank you so much for joining us, all of you who are here this evening. We are going to go into some Q&A, and I just wanted to make one more quick plug before we do the Q&A to join the Slack. I'm going to drop the link here in the chat really quick so that you can have an ongoing space for conversations about safety practices, women's safety teams, and how we can keep each other safe in our protests and in our communities. So please go ahead and click on that link, get connected. And I wanted to also note, thank you, Akib, for flagging this for me. There was a lot of people from Maine here this evening. So if there's a lot of you from a particular region, a particular area, and you're interested in forming safety teams, it would be wonderful if you click into the Slack link, connect with each other, and maybe, form a safety team yourselves that you can offer, as an offering to movement where you are. And another plug, we are yet to have an action on the map in Maine for November 2nd. So if any of y'all are interested in hosting an action on November 2nd, let us know, or go ahead and go to action.womensmarch.com and you can organize an action and add it to the map. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at our Q&A here. So I wanted to highlight this this scenario from Dana, and I'm hoping that Kalyan, you might be able to help respond to this one. In NYC, police often tell demonstrators they can't be on the sidewalk, so the demonstrators move to the street. Then they're told they can't be on the street, so they move to the sidewalk, often repeated, back and forth, back and forth. And then barriers are also deployed in a way that demonstrators can't easily or safely leave.
Yeah, so that often happens where sometimes the NYPD will issue a dispersal order, which is a legal order for people to vacate an area in a certain amount of time, or they're going to start arresting folks. Back in 2020, and really back the last 20 years I've been here, the NYPD will make orders or will change up things. The thing is, like, we don't have control over them. What we do have control over them, what we do have control over is ourselves and our plans. If this happens, then we do this. So, like I was saying with the protocols, if the police start pushing people towards the sidewalk, this is what we're going to do. We're going to back up and go to our exit route. So it's important for folks to always think about their exit points whenever going into an action. And once again, practicing situational awareness helps us to identify what is going on and where do we need to go in case we get cordoned in or trapped. There's a lot of nuance in that question. And if you're thinking about, like, how do I come up with a exit plan, we'll make sure to include some recommendations in the follow-up email.
Awesome. Hey Mia, see you. Thank you so much for chatting out in the chat. Thank you so much, Kalyan, for giving us some ways to think about that, because we know every context is different, but that is definitely something that I've seen police do here in Atlanta. It's a common tactic. I'm sure we did actually. I know that happened in Amarillo, so it's a common tactic, and it's something that happens all around the country, and something that is really a good flag or a good scenario for us to be prepared for, because it is so common. I think this might be a question for us at Women's March. I'm coming from Ohio to DC by myself. I don't have a team. Should I just link up with someone when I get to the meetup point? And that's from Millie. Millie, I guess my first question would be, do you want to have a team? Would you like to have someone travel with you? And if so, please go ahead and reach out. You can email me at amanda@womensmarch.com, and I can help you set up on our page. We have we call, like, resistance road trips, where people are creating a sign up, and folks who would also like to carpool can get together. So that's my first question, is if you wanted to have someone to travel with you, so we could try to facilitate that. And if you didn't, if you're planning to come by yourself, and if you know somebody else who's going, then that would be fantastic. I'm going to put a plug again for the Slack, because in addition to having a channel for women's safety teams, we have channels for lots of other things, and just general channels where you can connect to other women's marchers. And so one of the functions of the Slack is just to connect to other people. So for example, if you don't really want to travel from Ohio with someone else, but you'd like to have a buddy on site at the march, you could make a post in the Slack and say, hey, I'm attending the march by myself. I'd like to have a buddy, to meet up with there, so that, we can check in with each other and, help keep each other safe throughout the march. And usually, someone will be able to respond and say, oh, I'm coming by myself too, and I'd be happy to, be a buddy to you. Several folks have done that where they're coming alone and they kind of form pods. So again, we'd be happy to help facilitate either of those options. And Akib, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add hi, y'all. Thanks so much for joining, and thanks, Amanda. I also see Roz and a few other people have mentioned in the chat today, and last earlier this week about coming to DC. We're just these trainings are just to prepare us so we're ready, so we don't have to get ready, right? We're not anticipating threats of violence and things like that. Particularly, there have been no name threats in DC or other places. These are generalized trainings to keep our community safe. We welcome you to come to DC, show up locally, and really send that message that we are not afraid and we're not gonna stand back and let people take and scare us away from democracy. That's all.
Thanks, Akib. The one thing I would say too, just to add on to that, is that we often do experience safety in numbers, right? And so the more of us that are going to be there in DC on November 2nd, that creates an atmosphere of safety so that if there are counter protesters, we vastly outnumber them, so I do think that and as part of our risk assessment or our threat assessment, that's something that we take into consideration. And so the DC marches, like, of course, the 2017 was huge. And we expect for the November march to be quite large as well. And we definitely encourage folks to be prepared, to keep yourself safe and comfortable, but don't worry. We haven't received any reports of threats or anything like that for you to be concerned about. Like Akib said, this training is really general, not only for November 2nd, but really tools for you to take with you and hopefully form some safety teams in your own communities that you can, offer as a resource in your movement communities where you are, so that if, like Kalyan was mentioning, if another group is organizing a protest, and they have received threats or something like that, you actually have been trained and you know the different methodologies and ways to go about thinking through that sort of thing and being prepared to stay safe and help coordinate a safety response.
There's also a little plug for folks who went through this training and you're like, this is my role, I'm gonna do this thing. When you're coming to DC, we do have volunteer opportunities where you can get some hands-on experience, get some more training to be a marshal and help keep folks safe in DC. So if you're on we won't go back.com, click on March and there are links there to apply to be a volunteer, and Malika and her team will get right in touch with you.
Hey, thanks, Akib. I'm looking at, okay, so we've seen a couple questions from lawyers. I'm a retired lawyer and would like to be involved in helping lawyers with current licenses to handle arrest and criminal charges. And then, is there a role for people with legal training?
Yes, there definitely is. So the National Lawyers Guild has what are called legal observers, which are a third-party monitoring group at protests. These are folks that are trained specifically to monitor protests to identify if there have been any civil or human rights violated, and also to capture information at multiple points in an action. I would check out your local National Lawyers Guild chapter for more information.
Thank you so much, Kalyan. Absolutely. National Lawyers Guild is a great resource. If you're thinking about something more specific, feel free to reach out to us, organizing@womensmarch.com, because we know that there are a good number of lawyers in our base. And maybe there's sort of a Women's March contingent of people with legal training that can be connected to National Lawyers Guild or different other formations like Movement Law Lab, et cetera, who are doing really good work to support our movements. And then I love this question from Diane. What about being prepared in our local communities if there's a civil uprising? So like if it's not a planned rally, protest, or march, it's a spontaneous uprising. And to that I say, absolutely, that's exactly what Akib means. when we say stay ready so we don't have to get ready, right? So we want to train up and be prepared and keep our skills sharp so that we're not scrambling and trying to play catch up, and trying to learn all these skills in a moment like a civil uprising when, it's already sort of chaotic around us. It's great to be able to prepare in a moment like right now, so that later on we are ready and we don't have to get ready.
If I could add onto that, Amanda, that's a really great point. I mean, like, I'm a Californian. I grew up getting ready for the big one or the big earthquake. We prepare so that way we're able to take care of ourselves if something happens, right? Um, Professor Barbara Walter from UC Santa Barbara and the author of How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them has said that if there were to be any kind of um, uh, post-election violence, they would happen in sporadic areas around the United States. So creating a threat assessment for yourself, your community, your neighbors is a really good first step to identify what are the possible threats and how do you build capacities. And one of the very actionable things you can do is relationship building. That means like knowing who your neighbors are, knowing who's around the area. In case something goes down, who can you rely on? So I would really invite folks to check out the video on building a threat assessment and the resources that we shared.
Thank you so much, Kalyan. And speaking of the resources that you shared, someone had said examples and case studies would really help. Which section do they look at from all the resources to see the case studies that you'll have?
Yeah, if you go to nonviolentpeaceforce.org, we have case studies under resources and publications. But also, I would recommend that folks check out the book Beautiful Trouble, that talks about different ways that folks kept one another and each other safe in direct action scenarios.
Thank you. There's a question here. Are you familiar with the SALUTE model? Have you heard about that?
Yeah, is that like SALT, size, activity? I think that's a similar thing. It's
Yes,
just,
size, actions, activity, location, uniform, clothes, time, date, equipment, and weapons.
yep, yep, definitely. And folks should definitely check that out.
Cool. Thanks. James has put a link in the Q&A, so I'm just going to leave that up. So if anyone wants to check out that link, there's a graphic that explains the SALUTE model. How is 12 o'clock determined?
Yeah, so 12 o'clock, the way that we use the clock formation is 12 o'clock is usually where the if it's a rally, where the organizers or where the speakers are going to be. And that's where we put 12 o'clock. So people will always know that wherever the focal point is, that's 12, then 3, 6, and 9. And we situate folks based on that.
Thank you so much. I learned something I didn't know. I'm like, how is 12 o'clock determined? And then finally, any quick tips for small protests in rural areas? We typically experience hostile drive-by folks when we host an outside action, and people may curse or give us the finger, but our actual exposure to danger seems small.
Yeah, I would recommend that folks think about how to protect their identities as you're doing actions in rural areas. Because as we know, doxing and coming for folks in your town in rural areas is a very unfortunate but familiar occurrence. So definitely protecting your identities, making sure that you're never solo when you're doing any kind of action or whether you're doing as a safety team. And it's also helpful. Doxing is when people share your information on the internet for malicious reasons to either put you in danger, to steal your information, or to further harass you. But one thing I would also recommend that folks do is to look at the ACLED US Crisis Monitor, and we'll include that in the follow-up email so folks can check that out. And it shows where in the US in the past year there have been instances of political violence, whether that's during protests or just like sporadic forms of political violence. This can help inform you on how you need to protect yourself if you see a pattern of behavior with those reports.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you so much again, Kalyan, and the whole Nonviolent Peace Force team for bringing us this really incredible resource, so needed at this time. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening and giving us your time and attention. Please remember to join us in the Slack, in the Women to Women Organizing Slack, so we can continue this conversation and continue this work together. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great evening and stay safe.